have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And please kneel for our national anthem, which will now be sung by Roseanne Barr.
Is that your idea of humor?
Well, I'd say it combines a lot of news stories for the week, but actually the biggest news story of the week.
Blame him.
The biggest news story of the week was the fact that Ireland voted overwhelmingly to let their parliament allow some abortions. Our guests are Irish activists Anne Maguire of Revolting Lesbians and Reverend Bernard Lynch, an out gay priest, to discuss how Ireland has changed and the lessons that we can take from their progress.
I suspect we'll throw in a few questions about the Pope along the way, because we need to get some expert exegesis of that situation. But in other news, a federal appeals court in Pennsylvania, like the Virginia court last week, has affirmed the rights of transgender students.
Student activists in Florida have gotten a grocery store chain to stop making political contributions to supporters of the NRA and everybody else.
Back to religion. Franklin Graham is on the warpath in California to win the state back for the religious right.
Lesbian pioneer of New York and Florida, Connie Kurtz, an old friend of ours, has died at the age of 82.
I have all the religion headlines this week. A gay valedictorian banned from giving his speech at a Catholic high school found a way to do it anyway.
And the Pope is reported to have told the Italian bishops to keep gay men out of their seminaries.
In entertainment news, The Boys in the Band is opening on Broadway with an all-star out gay cast, and we'll let you know what we think of it.
Okay, but go ahead.
You go.
Well, we turn to our guests. Reverend Bernard Lynch, an out gay priest, author of, we've had you on the show about this, If It Wasn't Love, Sex, Death, and God, and you've been an activist for 50 years or so. And also longtime activist Anne Maguire of Revolting Lesbians, who was the author of Rock the Sham, the Irish lesbian and gay organization's battle to march in New York City's St. Patrick's Day parade. And you were both co-founders of the Irish lesbian and gay organization 28 years ago?
Is that all?
At least 1990.
So,
that'd be 28 years
We wanted
ago.
your long perspective, and you're both from Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in 1982, you were in Ireland campaigning against the anti-abortion amendment that has now been at least partially repealed.
Yeah.
So tell us about that campaign in 1982.
That campaign seemingly came up out of nowhere. It happened very, very quickly. And I think I started working on it. I was 19 at the time, out of high school. And it was pulled together very, very quickly and very strong. There was a very strong impulse among activists that we had to try and defeat this amendment, despite knowing that we actually didn't stand a chance.
And we had a picture of you marching in that. I don't know if we can get that up on the screen, back in 82.
I'm a little surprised as I think about it that abortion wasn't
No, that's the celebration.
That's the celebration.
the
many years later.
The next picture. There you are, in the middle there.
Over
Yeah.
the W in women's,
lovely.
yeah.
Yeah, with some friends from my high school, and the woman to the left of me was a New Zealander of Irish descent, and a lot of teachers, a huge amount of teachers involved in this campaign.
Now, wasn't abortion illegal already?
Yes, it was.
So what was the point of the amendment?
Okay, the SPUC, the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child, and the Pro-Life Amendment campaign got together very, very quickly in Ireland when legalized contraception among married people was deemed to be a private affair. So you could import contraceptives to Ireland if you were married because it was nobody's business. So they thought, if this is going to be unconstitutional, next step is abortion. So we need to get an amendment in there that's saying women and a fertilized egg basically have the same standing in Irish society.
And you may remember that same-sex marriage wasn't legal here when most states passed constitutional amendments against that.
Yeah.
Well, not technically, although there were places where we asserted that there was no law against it.
Yes.
And so people did get married, much to the horror of everyone else.
But let's go to Friday and Saturday when we learned the results of the vote by a 2-to-1 margin, the Irish people repealing the Eighth Amendment, which gives the Parliament the power now to allow some abortions. What did you feel when you heard this result?
I was thrilled. In fact, I said to Billy, it's more important to me than the marriage referendum.
Who's Billy?
My husband. Because it was the last bastion of Catholic, small c, conservatism and, you know, the Vatican state, which our country was when I left it. And
Which was when?
oh, I left in 1965. Okay, and
But you're back now.
I'm back now, and you know, we were back just before, Billy and I, just before the referendum, and we live in West Clare, the west of Ireland. And, you know, seeing the posters, the No campaign had many, many more posters than the Yes campaign, and they were horrendous. They were totally misogynistic and terribly racist, because England, that took 10 women a day to have abortions from the Republic of Ireland, you know, was demonized like it was, you know, the most pagan country in the world. And I took that to heart because I live in London. And I thought, my gosh, I spoke then to my father, who was 93, and I mean, he campaigned at 93, told all of his children, 6 of us, you know, we must vote yes, because if his grandchildren have to have an abortion, he does not want them going to England after we fighting for 700 years for our freedom.
Everyone has their reasons.
And how about you, Anne, your initial reaction when you heard the vote?
I was really shocked. I was really shocked that it was a landslide, basically, that it was a total reverse of when the amendment was introduced. More or less the same, 2/3 voted for it, because everyone had been saying it was going to be neck and neck, and all the people I knew in Ireland were freaking out. And then after that, I mean, Ireland in the 1980s was horrifying. I don't recall the 60s the way you would, but I feel like the introduction of this amendment was the beginning of a downward spiral, especially for women. You know, not long after Anne Lovett gave birth to a child in a grotto,
That's right.
in a church grotto, she died, the child died. Then an Irish school teacher, Eileen Flynn, was fired from her job for being pregnant outside of marriage. And then Joanne Hayes and the Kerry Babies Tribunal, infanticide. The police get a whole family, including the mother, to say that they killed this baby that they found on a beach, when they had been saying all along, no, the child was stillborn and it's buried in the field out the back. And there was a whole tribunal about police behaviour in that case, which turned into an all-out, total misogynistic attack on women. So for this, in my lifetime, I kind of feel like I can't, 35 years doesn't seem like a long time to me
It
at
is a
all
long time.
to have something completely reversed.
And we have seen the diminishment of the population identifying as Catholic. We now have a gay prime minister there. Marriage equality is legal by a vote of the people, the first country to do that.
They had 2 women presidents of the republic as well.
And how do you understand this turnaround in such a short period of time?
I say, if I may,
Please.
we must not forget that the conscience of the Irish people was reborn, quote unquote, on the terrible abuse of women by the Catholic Church, in the Catholic Church, and the abuse of children.
And when
And
all
what,
that was,
and what a sacrifice.
Yeah.
What a sacrifice. What a price to pay for freedom. And to me, that is the sine qua non of our freedom as Irish people, and we must never forget that. And the sort of disillusionment of people around institutional Catholicism. The Irish are still Catholic in the sense we'll always be pagan. We'll always have our statues and our holy water, and okay, but we are, whatever, if, whoever your God is, that's good. But we no longer will be subject to what I would call, I hope, an outside power telling us who we are and what to do, be they ecclesiastical or political. We had our freedom from Britain just almost 100 years, but we now have a genuine freedom from the Catholic Church.
Well,
and I rejoice.
The no side on this campaign said we don't want the Catholic Church speaking out on this even, and because of the association with abuse. And when one priest did, they walked out of the church. People got up from the pews and walked out on them.
Yeah.
That's something.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. I also think part of it is it's the generation of young women that got involved in this who would have not have had the experience that generations before them had as Irish women, but were aware enough either from mothers and aunts and sisters passing down stories, and also because of the abuse of the Catholic Church had been brought up over and over again, whether it was the Magdalene laundries, they were hearing about mother and child homes, of mass graves. So this is a generation who the yoke wasn't as strong around them, and they were getting enough information and were not having it. They were not having any of this.
One of the things we showed when we were talking about the marriage equality campaign a couple of years ago were all the people who came home to vote.
Yeah.
And I saw a picture the other day of women coming home to vote from all over the world in favor of this repeal.
Yeah.
And they looked like young women. And I wonder, in fact, whether there's a connection, whether the marriage equality campaign helped liberate people for this campaign, and whether it's all synergistic.
I think it did. I think I think Irish people felt very, very proud of the marriage referendum, and I think that also builds the way in the 80s the horror built on more and more horror, and that's what people had gotten used to. I think it's the same when it's turned around.
Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And the voting, you can only be out of the country for 18 months in order to go back to vote.
Right.
So
That's right.
I couldn't go back to vote. I would have given my eye teeth to, I'm still an Irish citizen, but we can't vote.
Can't vote, yes.
It would be young people, because they're the people who've just left in the last year and a half, you know.
Now-
But
Now, all you've authorized in Ireland there is the Parliament to change the law, which they say they will by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But that means you have legislators who are committed to liberalizing the abortion laws. Right here, look, what are we going to do in the United States? And we just had a ruling, a rejection by the Supreme Court of a restrictive law on abortion in Arkansas, which is going to leave like one place in Arkansas, in the entire state, where you can go get an abortion now.
A rejection of a challenge to that.
Yes, a rejection of a challenge to the law. Seemingly changing their own position on this. So, we've won abortion rights in this country. In New York, through the legislature in 1970, both houses Republican at the time. The Republican Party has changed.
Yeah.
Now, state legislatures are passing the most restrictive laws that they can. We got it through court decisions, through Roe v. Wade. We're going to have to claw back to get power and change this again.
I totally agree.
Well, let's talk about the power of the Catholic Church. We've had news stories in the last week about the Pope meeting with the Chilean abuse survivor,
That's right.
who I think beat him into submission in a 3-hour meeting to get him to say, supposedly, that gay was okay with God and with
It's
him.
okay, can I go now?
But at the same time, we also have the report that the Pope behind closed doors is telling the bishops or the cardinals or whatever, watch out for gay men in the seminaries, keep them out, they're too influential.
Well, I mean, we all know that if all gay priests were to leave, that would be 50% of the priesthood.
Yes.
At least. But I mean, I am very annoyed with this quote-unquote good Pope because of my involvement, particularly in AIDS ministry in this country. Where I would accuse the two predecessors, Pope John Paul II and Benedict, of soul murder during that pandemic. I mean, we were the only group of people in the AIDS crisis who were told that we were to blame for our disease.
Yeah.
Imagine saying that to men dying. You are to blame. That was never said of people who, were alcoholics and died of liver cancer, and it shouldn't be. And it was never said of smokers, et cetera, who died of lung cancer.
And
it was said of us.
And life-saving measures like condoms were refused.
Were refused. So I want, if this man is truly a man of God, I want him first and foremost to apologize to the lesbian, gay, transgendered community for this atrocity.
Yeah.
Just say sorry. The Jewish people got it. They quote unquote forced it, and rightly so. We deserve it. Not just we who are Catholic, but the entire world.
Sure.
That is atrocious. And it hurts me even today to talk about it, because I sat with men after men after men who could not even have a glimmer of hope because of what the Catholic Church said and did at that time.
And we watched them sit on the Public Education Board of Ed here in New York and influence sex education policy in the city.
Yes, but as soon as they stopped coming to meetings because they thought nothing was going to happen, we got condoms in the schools.
Nonetheless, they tried to exert their influence
Yes.
far beyond their
Well,
parishioners.
I mean, isn't that the story of Ireland?
Totally. And then if you show up outside a Catholic institution or a church or a cathedral, you're like, what are you doing? It's a religious institution. How dare you bring politics into it? And it's like, hello?
There's nobody more political.
Political.
Exactly.
Completely
And
political.
we have a story this week that we'll go on about this lovely boy at a Catholic high school who was told he couldn't give his valedictorian address and did it anyway.
But Anne and Bernard, we have this wonderful victory and all this progress in Ireland that we've cataloged here on LGBT and women's issues.
Yeah.
What do you feel? I mean, people who are watching this in America are hungry for change. And what is the lesson there? Is there something that we can learn about how to make change and how to do it that will turn things around here?
Okay, so I have been thinking a little bit about this. So what I would like to say is activists in general are hopeful people. Otherwise, you would not do the work ever. So no matter how awful it is, if you're doing it, you're hopeful. And one of the things about looking at the repeal movement is one of the women, who also happens to be a lesbian, who did a lot of stuff in Ireland for liberation of the entire lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community, is Alva Smith. She was central on the ground during the anti-amendment campaign in the 1980s, and she has not given up in the last 35 years. She's one of the leaders of the Yes
Repeal.
which, you know, incorporated over 100 different groups. So she is someone who has all this experience. She knows how to work things. She knows how to run campaigns. She knows what to do politically. So she has that experience which she has been willing to share, to bring other people in, to make other people leaders, to, you know, I guess maybe help younger women know that, you know, how to do grassroots organizing, what to do in the media, what not to do, what politicians do. So I think that learning and the intergenerational thing is essential.
Well, you've both been at this for
Well,
decades.
I would say, like, I am a believer, despite my dissidence with all religion, including my own. But I would say, for me, God is not a who. God is a what. God is justice, and nothing more and nothing less. God is a what. And I have that in common with Anne, with Anne, and with Andy. And that's the most important thing in the world. That's for me, and I say that to all believers out there. God is a what. God is justice. And that's all that matters.
The other thing that happened in this campaign was they didn't use euphemisms. They called themselves the Abortion Rights Campaign.
Yes.
Very consciously.
Yeah.
They weren't going to soft pedal it. They weren't going to call it pro-choice or anything like that. And that turned out to be effective.
Very effective, and also very, it was difficult during the anti-amendment campaign because the decision was made not to say pro-choice and not to say abortion. Wow. That was a difficult decision, and there was a lot of internal turmoil about that.
Well, you never know going into these things what is the right way to do
Never.
it. And if you win, it seems to be the right way, but who knows?
Yeah.
But I think keeping justice as your guiding principle is the way to
As the only God.
Proceed.
There is no other God. The co-equality, there is no other. And if there's more than that, and we're all, you know, dancing in the sky with each other, that's absolutely wonderful.
a bonus.
The other thing that happened that I read about this campaign, I don't like to give any credit to Facebook, but apparently they blocked foreign advertisements seeking to influence the vote. They're taking,
Wow.
they're finally taking
The
steps.
Russian bots were
They're
not.
finally taking steps to try to stop this, which could help worldwide politics if
That's
they do.
true. I think Facebook and Google 10 days before completely clamped down on any foreign advertising.
All right,
money.
well, we need to wind this up, but let's take just a few seconds to promote your current work.
Okay, I'm currently working with a fabulous group called Revolting Lesbians. We are following the money, the dark money in political life here, and our strategic plan is to go after Rebecca Mercer at the Museum of Natural History because it's the only legitimate board she sits on. Everything else is alt-right.
She's a climate change
Denier.
and she's a far right winger. And she doesn't believe.
Far right wing, really.
So if we Google revolting lesbians,
you'll find our Facebook
okay, get
page.
involved.
Yeah.
What's your current crusade?
My current crusade is with my husband, Billy. We've been crusading a long time.
Put them up.
But
Get the president of Ireland.
We've set up an organisation called Bruntonus in
Yeah.
Ireland
look at
for
that.
LGBTQI youth in rural areas.
That's not a youth, that's the president of
That's
Ireland,
the
Michael D.
president, oh
Higgins,
gosh,
after
yeah.
your wedding.
Yes, yeah.
Definitely.
And we've set up this charity
Okay.
to help kids in rural areas who are queer, to enable them to come out and support them in the coming out process. So that's our job.
The work continues.
It does indeed.
Great to see you both, and thanks for coming in,
thanks for
and
having
congratulations.
Keep up the good work, and you're going to be in Dublin protesting the Pope in
I
August.
am indeed. I am indeed.
Okay.
Take
We'll
care.
see you
Thank you.
again sooner, I hope.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Well, that was fascinating.
Absolutely. It's nice to have something to celebrate.
Yes, especially since this has been a week about Roseanne and bigotry.
Well, I celebrate the fact that maybe there's finally some pushback against the open bigotry that has been unleashed in the country. I hear from African American friends that they think this is going to lead to another storm that's going to make things worse in some ways. I mean, obviously they're against Roseanne. but they're worried about what's happening in the country.
Well, I celebrate Wanda Sykes, who, as a consulting producer and writer on The Roseanne Show, was the first to get up and walk away.
Or as Roseanne would say, throw me under the bus.
Thank you, Wanda, for being
Yes.
a visionary lesbian and saying you're not going to put up with this before the tidal wave hit.
Yes.
Anyway, our president, of course, is out there feeling sorry for himself again in this context. So let's start with a little Trump administration news.
Well, you know, he signed executive orders this week making it easier to fire federal workers. I don't know. I mean, weakening the unions, sees them as a bulwark against the fascist change that he wants to institute in the country. So expect court challenges there.
Well, there is a new court challenge in the military context. Lambda Legal Defense and OutServe-SLDN, the former Service Members Legal Defense Network, have filed suit on behalf of 2 members of the military who are HIV positive and who have been rejected for jobs, one in the Judge Advocate's office. And
Well, the rules now say you can't be an officer and that you can't be deployed. So therefore, we have to get rid of you. And this is antiquated. It's against science. Of course, the whole administration is against science. So they're suing.
Right, which is good. And then we move to Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. Now, she just commits crimes every day. So first, the Human Rights Campaign did a neat little trick. They projected on the side of the Department of Education
says, Betsy DeVos, how do you sleep at night? And then they had various messages.
When only 25% of LGBTQ youth always feel safe in class.
Because as we said last week, Betsy testified before the Congress, no, I'm not doing anything about this until you pass a law that makes me do it or the Supreme Court tells me to, even though lower courts have told her to.
Right. And then she visited in her, I don't know if it's her hometown, but...
in Michigan.
Grand Rapids. That's where Amway is, which is what her husband's family is
and
involved
this
with.
8th grade genderqueer student named Torin Hodgman wore a trans flag while helping give Betsy DeVos a tour of the school.
Very cool,
Wow.
Torin. Yeah, very cool.
If that young person can do this, we can all do something.
Yeah. So let's stay on education. The actual big headline this week, as last week, is a ruling by a federal court. Last week we had Gavin Grimm finally winning his case in Virginia for the right to, as a trans boy, use the men's bathroom at his school. Well, now the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Philadelphia has also upheld the right of trans students at Boyertown School District.
Well, this was rather unprecedented because they heard the oral arguments. They waited like 2 minutes and then they said, here's our decision.
It was a few more minutes than that,
Well,
but not a lot. Under an hour.
It was right there.
Yeah. So congratulations. Thank you to the court. And the pro-trans student policies of Boyertown School District are upheld.
And I heard somebody saying that the Parkland students were sort of fading away. Oh no, they're out there, and we have another example of their power this week. The Publix grocery chain gave money to an NRA-backed candidate for Florida governor, and David Hogg, we have a picture of him. So they went to the local Orlando Publix.
They went to several Publix around Florida.
And they laid down on the aisles.
They went to the Parkland Publix, no?
Huh? Well, maybe it was.
Whatever.
I thought it was Orlando. But all right. 25 protesters lay in the aisle blocking customers for 15 minutes, and they called for a boycott of Publix. And Publix said, not only are we not giving money to this guy, we're not going to give money to any political candidates now.
Now, in spite of both the Virginia and Pennsylvania federal courts ruling in favor of protections for trans students, the right wing has not given up. And in Oregon, they are suing to overturn pro-trans student policies in schools there. That case has not been decided yet, but they are relentless. And even if we win every single one of these cases, they are going to continue to come after us.
And they will be held by the Trump nominees to the court, including Kyle Duncan, who was confirmed this week for the Fifth Circuit, an anti-gay activist lawyer who also fought the contraception mandate in the ACA. He defended the racist voter ID law in North Carolina. Lambda called him a bigot. And this is who was on the court now. And then Trump nominated as Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, Ronald Mortensen. He is from an anti-immigration hate group, the Center for Immigration Studies, which is funded by the white nationalist John Tanton. This is what's happening, folks. Wake up! But he did pardon Jack Johnson. And when are we going to get our pardons for the homosexuality? You know, Jack Johnson was convicted of miscegenation.
I only have 4 misdemeanor convictions on my record. I don't need to be pardoned. Well, in Covington, Kentucky, a new young hero, gay valedictorian of Holy Cross High School, Christian Bales.
Yes.
Not the actor.
No.
But he was named the valedictorian. He's someone who's a little gender nonconforming at school.
Says he's gay and gender nonconforming.
Yeah, he likes to wear various styles of dress. But he had agreed.
Which was no problem at the prom, apparently.
Well, and he agreed to show up at graduation in
mufti.
Yes, regular clothes. But the school told him that he would not be allowed to speak as valedictorian. And in fact, the class president, a young girl who was also the salutarian, was also told she could not speak.
The archdiocese got a hold of their speeches and said they were too angry.
And confrontational.
I read the speeches. They were
too.
They were wonderful.
They were, and they weren't the least bit inappropriate. They were just about, we've had a wonderful time here at this school.
It referenced the Parkland students.
And said we've all grown and become strong people, and we should go on in life and continue that.
So the diocese said it somehow didn't conform to Catholic teaching, so the kid's father said, well, why don't you give the speech on a bullhorn? So he did. After the ceremony, there he is, and people gathered around, and you know what? It had a lot more impact.
That's a small bullhorn. We could have gotten him a bigger bullhorn, but he did very well.
Congrats.
Yeah.
All right.
In Hawaii, the governor has signed a no conversion therapy for minors bill. That's excellent news.
It was a charming ceremony with a lot of LGBT youth there.
Yeah, and in Starkville, Mississippi, where they were having a fight over having a pride parade, the city has now agreed to pay $12,750 in attorney fees to the LGBT group and to declare October LGBT History Month and to meet regularly with representatives of the community.
Lots of progress there in Mississippi.
Well, 2,500 people showed up to march on March 24th for the parade that they tried to stop.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. Now, we're continuing to have issues with the New York City Pride Parade coming up at the end of this month now on June 24th, preceded by the Dyke March the night before. Ann McGuire and I will both be there. But the Heritage of Pride group, which runs the Pride Parade, has now agreed to allow a resistance contingent, although limited in number, but you can sign up for that, learn more about that contingent and sign up for it by going to the Facebook page of Rise and Resist to find the New York City Pride Resistance Contingent. Now, one thing that disturbs me is they've announced, Rise and Resist has announced that the contingent will assemble at 3 p.m. for a 3:30 kickoff. The parade starts at noon. We're going to be in the back of the parade. That's no good.
That's no good at all.
So there is a meeting this Saturday, June 2nd, at 1:30 p.m. at the LGBT Community Center at 208 West 13th Street to continue to plan for the parade and discuss other issues around it, like everybody has to wear a wristband. So you can come to that meeting this Saturday. And then next week on June 5th, Heritage of Pride, which runs the parade, is having a big open meeting where everybody is going to air their grievances. And that will be at the LGBT Center the 5th, Tuesday?
Yes, and we'll see how
Tuesday night.
And we'll see how resistant Heritage of Pride is.
Yeah.
In California, in Orange County, Republican Dana Rohrabacher told the Orange County Association of Realtors he opposes extending the 50-year-old Fair Housing Act to cover sexual orientation and gender identity, even though California law requires that.
I don't consider that a headline. Dana Rohrabacher has been doing that for years.
But the realtors dumped him. That's the news.
Okay.
The realtors dumped him as a result. That's the news.
Well, I wish they would, thank you for elucidating that, and I wish they would dump Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, and makes Billy Graham look like a progressive.
Oh, yes.
Franklin Graham is so right-wing. So he is now running around California campaigning against the proposed law that would declare conversion therapy consumer fraud.
Well, he thinks he can get evangelicals revved up enough that they can actually turn California red again, is basically his plan. I don't know.
There are pockets of redness in California. After all, Dana Rohrabacher has been elected in California. Devin Nunes is elected in California.
They all have opponents this year.
But here's what Franklin Graham is telling people in California in these churches. He's saying, churches, go ahead and preach about this. Give up your tax exemption. Call the bluff of the federal government. Don't stand down. You have to stand up and make, the right wing dominant again politically.
No.
It's quite a operation.
Well, in other crime news, a crazy case in California, a condemned killer, we have a picture of him, Robert Van Hook. He told the parole board that when he strangled and stabbed David Self to death in Cincinnati in 1985, he experienced homosexual panic. He said he also suffered abuse as a kid, but he had a history of luring gay men to apartments to rob them, so homosexual panic, and he has stabbed a bunch of people in prison. But we also have a picture
Wasn't that in Ohio?
Didn't I say Ohio?
I thought you said somewhere else.
I'm sorry.
Maybe you said Ohio.
It is Ohio, but we want to put up a picture of David Self, whose life was rubbed out.
That's Robert Van Hook.
That's Robert Van Hook, the perpetrator, who's been convicted and is on death row. And we're not in favor of the death penalty, but the Supreme Court did uphold his death sentence. And there's David Self, who was killed when he was 25 years old.
So this was 33 years ago, and Van Hook he was constantly preying on gay men. The idea that he's now trying to assert a homosexual panic defense is ridiculous. There is another sad contemporary violence story from Denver.
Yes.
A gay couple, two men, had left a club and were walking home and were hand in hand, and
in their own neighborhood.
Yeah. And it's a downtown neighborhood. I looked it up on the map. And they were attacked by a guy yelling, effing.
We'll bleep that.
Yeah. Faggots. I was so concentrated on the next word.
Right.
And those are knife wounds on the back of one of these guys.
They were both stabbed, and one of them, Roman, said it's way deeper than physical damage. You wonder who else is out there. But they said they're not going to let it affect them in terms of being out and being open.
Yeah. In Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
There was a guy, Andrew Tileman, who shot up a restaurant, wounding 4 people.
Louis on the Lake was the name of it.
And it turns out that the cops had been warned about him by members of the LGBT community beforehand because
In January.
he'd been going around putting up anti-trans flyers all over town.
And he did, in May, he was reported for doing an anti-trans rant on YouTube. He said all trans people are robots, and he was losing his mind. And he said, I am begging for help. But he had no trouble getting a gun and shooting the place up.
Nobody dead, but 4 wounded in the restaurant. And in Portland, Oregon, a trans woman, Gigi Pierce, was shot dead. Now, this is believed not to be so much a hate crime as a personal argument with Sophia Adler, who has been arrested for that crime.
Well, let's talk about somebody we didn't lose to violence, but somebody we mourn very deeply, Connie Kurtz, 82 years old. We knew Connie and Ruthie Berman, her wife. They were friends since the 1950s. They became lovers in 1974.
They were suburban married women who were friends in the neighborhood, and after about a dozen years, they realized they were in love, divorced their husbands.
And I believe it was, I think it was Ruthie who was the teacher,
Yes.
and they sued for partner benefits for Connie, along with Ron Madsen and Richard Dietz and another couple. They won domestic partner benefits in 1993 for all city employees in the city of New York. It was a tremendous achievement. They were also on the Donahue Show, and they were quite fierce. They got religion about being lesbians. They did. And they just would not
Nothing like a convert.
Yes. Like Franklin Graham. Well, that's different kind of a convert.
But we have, they were also the stars of a documentary movie, Ruth and Connie, Every Room in the House, and we have a little trailer from that to give you a flavor.
I had a wonderful husband, children. It was a great package. And knowing that this all would change.
My name is Connie Kurtz, and I'm a lesbian, and it is my friend that I fell in love with.
Now, all of a sudden, Ruth Berman, Connie Kurtz, I gewalt. The community was falling apart.
Even when we came together, we had 2 bedrooms, and you bought those plaques.
As cute as these plaques may be, this represents the closet of what someone would go through to put out a lie. The laws are against me. We can't get married. I refuse to keep quiet.
I now pronounce you married.
My God, we have been through it all. Bogey and Bacall, they have nothing on us.
They had to come to New York to get married, back to New York. They live in Florida. And
They were so cute.
they were just wonderful activists.
So, and between them, 14 grandchildren and 27 great-grandchildren. Ruth is still very active, and our condolences and love to her.
Oh,
and
I mean, they're active in things like, the LGBT Center in Lake Worth, Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. They started, groups down there in Florida as well. They were both counselors, and they were good ones.
we also mourn the death and celebrate the life of Tanya Saunders, died at 82. She ran the Cubbyhole Bar here in New York City for more than 30 years, which was a lesbian bar, but in fact welcomed everybody. It's Andy Cohen's favorite hangout after he does Watch What Happens Live.
She said she wasn't into exclusion in any form, but yes, she was running an historic place.
Yeah.
Okay, where are we?
In Connecticut, good news, the governor there has signed a bill that mandates respect for transgender inmates. This is believed to be the first bill of its kind in the country. People will be assigned to prisons in accord with their lived gender identity and have the proper pronouns used, and facilities, and health care and all of that in Connecticut.
And in New Jersey, they passed a bill to remove surgical requirements to change your gender marker on your birth certificate. And they also say that your death certificate must reflect your gender identity.
In Portland, Oregon again, something called the Ambridge Event Center is suing the Holy Rosary Church. It turns out that the church rented its property to the event center to run its business out of there, running events. It's an event space. But the church said, you may not run events for LGBTQ people.
It's like a covenant.
So, well, the church does do covenants. Even when they sell their property, they have covenants on it that you can't do anything gay on those properties. So they had this in the rental agreement, and the event center just wasn't thinking about it and signed this agreement, and then had to actually turn away gay events. And guess what? They're out of business because they got in such hot water over this. So now they're suing the church for putting them in this position. I don't know if they can win. They signed the agreement. It was quite explicit.
Contract law.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether they recover anything
Somebody
on that.
else we didn't
Because it's against the law to reject LGBT people at events in Oregon.
Somebody else who died this week we've got to mention was Denny Farrell. He was an assembly member from Washington Heights in New York in Manhattan forever, and he died at 86. He was an early LGBT rights supporter, and the first time I lobbied him on LGBT rights, went into his office and he said, well, it's no secret, I live with a lesbian. And I didn't know what he was talking about, but it was rather candid. And he was our Manhattan leader.
I don't know what he's talking about either.
Okay.
In Indiana, Evansville, the Crossroads Christian Church took over most of the operation of the Potter's Wheel meal program, and now they fired a gay worker because they're a very right-wing church. So the First Presbyterian Church has withdrawn from the partnership that was running the Potter's Wheel.
Right.
So it's nice to see some religious organizations rebelling against the right-wing ones.
But it was not nice seeing Harvey Milk's image with a rainbow flag on a Stoli vodka bottle. Now, this is vodka that we poured into the streets in protest of anti-LGBT laws in Russia, but Stuart Milk, who's Harvey's nephew and controls his image, I think, has obviously licensed it to them. Harvey cut his political teeth on a Coors boycott because they had bad labor practices. But God, it's just not a nice thing to see.
Well, here's a nicer thing. In Massachusetts, a couple of organizations have done a study, and they've asked the population about how they identify by sexual orientation and gender identity. 16% of 18 to 24-year-olds in Massachusetts identified as LGBT.
10% of 25 to 34-year-olds, but among 65 to 74-year-olds, 3% identify as such.
I don't care about any of that. 16%
It's huge.
of youth identify in Massachusetts.
They also say that Massachusetts is now the gayest state in the nation next to
Vermont.
There you are.
And it is next to Vermont. And in New York City, the city is sponsoring a new ad campaign in subways and buses and around town called We Are LGBTQ Youth. The ad, I'm not sure why we need that youth campaign now, but I guess
it's for everybody.
It's visibility,
it's for everybody.
Positivity. But more importantly, they have a website that has a lot of resources for youth. And in fact, if you subscribe to our little once-a-week newsletter at gayusatv.org, we'll give you that information.
We have lots of extras in our newsletter that go beyond what we talk about on the show.
Heaven forbid.
And by the way, we talked about George Takei being accused by Scott Brunton of a sexual assault back in 1981, and a reporter has done a deep dive with Scott Brunton on this, and he's changed his story several times. The reporter, Shane Snow, is not making any conclusions, but Takei has always denied it. Okay. Yeah, we're running out of time here, so let's go to international news.
Not immediately. International news. In Brazil, the Ministry of Human Rights has adopted an action plan to fight discrimination and violence against LGBT people, which is a little rampant at the moment.
445 anti-LGBT murders in 2017. That's a massive. It's apparently the largest.
Really? All in 1 year?
It says Brazil has the highest murder rate against LGBT people in the world, 445 in 2017.
Wow.
Activists are a little skeptical of this campaign, and they want to see it well funded.
Sure.
That's the point.
Well, it's a start. In India, a mob in Hyderabad
Yes.
killed a trans woman and injured 3 others.
There was a group of kids going around saying they're child traffickers. They're trying to kidnap your children. So the mob just opens up and starts doing this. No, they were begging these trans women.
This mob psychology, you see it at Trump rallies too.
200 egged them on while and 12 were arrested.
Could happen here.
In Wales, Wales has become the first part of the UK to require LGBTQ inclusive sex education.
Thank you to them. All right.
I guess we can skip the other stories.
We have a few minutes.
No, it's all right. We can go
Okay.
back if we have to.
AIDS news. Costs are going up for those who are HIV positive and those using PrEP for their medications. Insurers are, canceling. Wouldn't think that read annulling. Canceling copay assistance programs. Insurance rates are going up all over. Some of
You're
this
telling me.
Some of this
I
is
can't wait for Medicare.
only a few months. Some of this is being ginned up by, of course, the Trump administration to further create rationales to cancel Obamacare or what's left of it.
Yeah.
All right, entertainment news.
Dear Evan Hansen is a huge hit on Broadway, and they're going to have their national tour, and they have cast the out-gay actor Ben Levy-Ross as Evan in the national tour. It starts in October in Denver at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts, and it's going to play in 50 cities over 2 years.
Now, should we talk about Boys in the Band?
I guess we should. We went to see the Boys in the Band. Now, this was a very important. You saw the play 50 years ago. All right.
1969, I saw The Road Company in Boston.
Okay.
I was in college.
And I was underage. It was an R-rated movie, and I had trouble getting into the theaters at 16 to see the movie of the original cast from off-Broadway playing this. And I thought it was important at the time because I hadn't seen very many images of gay people at all, even though these were self-loathing ones. And
I found it very disturbing and self-loathing in 1969. I saw it probably within weeks of the Stonewall Rebellion. It had opened in New York in 1968.
And the Gay Activist Alliance went up and protested it after Stonewall.
And when this revival was announced, and it has been revived occasionally, you've seen other productions.
I've seen off-Broadway productions, and I've not seen the need, but this is a tremendous cast of out-gay actors. I mean, come on. Jim Parsons plays the lead, Michael, the host of the party. Zachary Quinto is the birthday boy, Harold. Andrew Rannells is Larry. Robin DeJesus plays Emery. And Matt Bomer plays Donald. It's an out-gay all-star cast.
All-out gay cast.
Directed by out-gay Joe Mantello. Produced by out-gay Ryan Murphy. On Broadway for the first time.
So nonetheless, when I heard about this revival, my first reaction was, I don't want to see this. It's all about self-loathing. And then friends of mine who saw it in previews said, oh, this is so great. It's so funny. I laughed and laughed and laughed. And I thought, geez, maybe I should give it a try. It's certainly a landmark production. I'm a homosexual. I should see this play.
For history purposes.
Yeah, so I went to see it.
The Way We Were.
Well, it is the way we were, I hope, although, of course, in some pockets, still the way we are. But I found it horrible.
Yeah, I mean, we were sitting in the center section, and there wasn't a lot of laughter. I mean, I knew all the jokes, and they weren't landing for me in a lot of. But in fairness, there was a lot of laughter in the audience. A lot of people
on the fringes and the outside the critics area.
We're roaring with laughter.
Of course, the best thing about it was that we were seated right behind Bernadette Peters and Victor Garber, but they were
who were
not
doing Hello
laughing.
Dolly, who were doing, and I'm going to see that this week.
Okay, you can tell us about that. I'll bet you'll enjoy that more.
Okay.
But it is, even in parts of it, I was willing to say, oh, this is not so bad, you know. It's not all that self-loathing. They're sort of joking around. They have this little dance sequence that was nice. But then the main character, towards the end, gets drunk. Michael, Jim Parsons, and he launches into this rant.
Yes.
That is so hateful.
Yes.
And so horrible.
That's the show.
And
and I'm going to say something, which is going to sound funny, but I don't think he was vicious enough. I mean, Jim Parsons played God the last time he was on Broadway. Maybe not the last time he was on Broadway, but he played God. And he introduces himself as, you know, you might know me as Jim Parsons, a beloved sitcom star, but I'm God. And he is. He's a nice guy. And he also did The Normal Heart, by the way,
right.
Where he was very good. But I think he needed to be more vicious to convey this character. I know that sounds odd, but that's what I was feeling.
I didn't need him to be more vicious. He was plenty vicious enough for me. And do you think I would have liked it more if he were more vicious?
I think it would have worked more dramatically if he had played it to the hilt, which I think Kenneth Nelson did in the movie, you know.
Well,
I mean, that was my feeling.
My feeling was that I was sorry I'd gone and that there was no intermission to leave at, and that I had to sit through that because I just found it loathsome.
I've seen the actors interviewed, and they're saying they think it's important for people to see what we lived through, you know, given all the advances that we've made today. And of course, Mart Crowley, the playwright, is still alive. This is his first time on Broadway with the show.
I would also like to point out that there were plenty of people at that time and before who were not self-loathing and who led the revolution and who were living fine, happy lives. And to act like this is the only picture of what was taking place at that point in time is a stereotype that is not entirely legitimate as far as I'm concerned.
Well.
So go see Angels in America. That is a nuanced, deep, rich consideration of the good and the bad.
And there is this two-part play called The Inheritance that's playing in London and is transferring to the West End, which has gotten rave reviews about gay men in New York at this time and back in I guess in the late 60s, early 70s, and then takes us to today. And I hope that makes it to America. It's written by a New Yorker, Matthew Lopez.
I also thought some of the performances were excellent and some were not.
Oh, I thought Andrew Rannells was pretty hilarious as Larry. I thought he was pretty good.
He was
very good. And I thought Robin DeJesus as Emery
was terrific.
was also good.
Yeah. Whatever. Anyway, all right. A couple of other things. I have seen a couple of movies that are being made available, either opening in cities or being made available on video on demand. The best is the documentary from last year, The Fabulous Alan Carr, which is all about 70s and 80s Hollywood, and he was a fascinating character. And he produced and you really lived the whole thing, the Oscars with Snow White and Rob Lowe singing Proud Mary.
The worst ever.
The worst, and got him he just lost his entire career, Alan Carr. Over that. He had produced the movie Grease. He had been involved in the production of The Deer Hunter. The Broadway production of La Cage aux Folles and all sorts of stuff. So it's really quite interesting. That's available on video on demand on June 5th. And then there's a terrible movie, Discreet, opening in LA, and it's weird, and skip that.
They're not going to tell us what the title is.
Discreet.
Oh!
It's directed by this guy, Travis Matthews, who made Interior Leather Bar. This is a very weird, silly little indie that makes no sense and is supposed to be
being with us.
Revenge thriller.
And we hope to see you next week.
The Fabulous Alan Carr, video on demand, and Angels in America.
Okay.
And Three Tall Women.
Yes, indeed.
All right, we'll see you next week.